In this edition of Locked On Capitals, I break down all of the movement with your Capitals on the deadline next on Locked On Caps.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, and I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check it out. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, I talk about the activity surrounding your Washington Capitals on the trade deadline and what it means for the Caps going forward. And then later in the show, I will go over all the movement that's been done this last week or so leading up to the deadline. And then I will talk about the team going forward. But just to get it going here, I got to say, not a lot of movement going on with the Capitals. They took care of almost all of their activity in the week beforehand, week plus beforehand. So today was pretty slow, all things considered. And I'm hearing from Mike Vogel, the Caps have nothing in the trade queue now that the 3 p.m. Eastern trade deadline has passed. No trades for them today, but they moved 5 regulars out in 4 separate deals over the last week plus. So ultimately, wise movement for Brian McClellan. Wise movement for the most part for the entire NHL. It kind of makes it a slower trade deadline, though. So if you're someone like me that follows the deadline, for years, I would just get amped up for this moment and, have popcorn and pop and sitting back and watching it like it was my favorite movie. And you've seen that slowly over the years start to kind of dwindle as a lot of teams are making their bigger movement beforehand, ultimately in the team's best interest. But if you're a spectator looking for big fireworks and that kind of thing, it didn't really have any of that. So the big movement for the Caps was the Washington Capitals have re-signed forward Nicolas Aube Kubel to a 1-year contract extension. Aube Kubel's contract will carry an average annual value of $1.225 million. And this follows the script of what the Capitals have done thus far. In the regard of making small movement. I spoke about that on this podcast, that if I see the Caps going out and doing anything, it's going to be small movement, like the new Sonny Milano deal, the Dylan Strome deal, now the Nicolas Aube Kubel deal. I understand there were some bigger trades and departures, that kind of thing. But as far as bringing people to this team, other than the Rasmus Sandin thing, pretty small movement. So a solid move, all things considered. Their crosshairs were definitely on Nicolas Aube Kubel, as there were teams seeking his services. For whatever reason, before the Caps picked him up, he just did not fit in with the Maple Leafs scheme. But ultimately, I think he is good for the Capitals going forward. And taking a look at the deal, it was a good deal. It was just $1.225 million in only 1 year. So in a lot of ways, just to kind of see, can he continue that progress going forward on a larger scale? I like what he brings to his game. He has a good set of wheels. He can bring a physical aspect to his game if that's what's called for. But all things considered, a great move for the Caps. A+ marks for Brian McClellan on that. Just a really great move. So what you're doing here is you're slowly kind of solidifying a lineup. This team will look a lot different, I think, probably by next year. I was listening to Rupper on NHL Network, and he was saying that he expects some movement from the Capitals this summer. So we know, unless Mike Vogel is wrong, there's nothing in the queue right now. So all the movement that was made has already been made, and that is all there's going to be going forward. So I guess it remains to be seen how this team plays out and what movement we do see in the offseason. Because we know that this team is going to look a bit different in years to come. Ultimately, how is that going to manifest? It remains to be seen. This was from earlier in the day. Per reports, Trevor Van Riemsdyk won't be moved at the deadline. The 31-year-old blue liner is a pending UFA, but due to injuries to Jensen and Martin Faravari on Wednesday, he will be sticking around. TVR has been taking on top pairing minutes, more ice time as a result, and an extension is possible, and that is where it was left. I have not heard anything more on that as of right now. So I guess that remains to be seen what shakes out there. But as it sounds, it sounds like they are not going to be moving him, and that's good news for the Capitals. As like they were talking about there, he plays a huge role on this team. So a positive thing going forward. And again, I like what the Capitals did in the deadline here. I like that they didn't try to cram everything all in on the final day and hope that there were going to be players available, because ultimately what would have been the case is you may have been able to move some of those players or attain some of those players, but you would have gotten diminished returns, or you would have had to pay far more for the players that you were seeking out. So I think that the NHL in general is getting smarter. They're like, we're going to do these deals, we're going to do them ahead of time, and see what's available. See, most notably, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, like the Gustafsson deal, that kind of thing. So not a whole lot of movement in general. I got to say it was a pretty slow deadline. If we're talking about former Cap news, Jacob Vrana is on the move. He is now a part of the St. Louis Blues organization. We wish him nothing but the best. He's had some personal issues. He's had some professional issues, but we wish nothing but the best for Jacob Vrana. Was really an important part of this team, but just was never really able to find his way. A bit unfortunate. And, after here, we know that he went to the Red Wings. Subsequently, he had some personal issues and had some mixed reviews on the ice there. And he's hoping that a change of zip code will be what the doctor ordered. And again, we're wishing nothing but the best for Jacob Vrana going forward. But just to wrap this up, some exciting news for the Capitals as they get Nicolas Aube Kubel under contract. And the reports that I heard earlier was that there was going to be no movement with TVR. That is where it's left off as I record this at 3:21 Central. If there's any updates, make sure and follow us on Twitter at Locked On Caps or at DanCaps218, and I will make sure and keep you updated on that. But as of right now, that's what I know. All right, so after the break here, we are going to go over the movement. So I told you what happened today on the trade deadline, but there's been a lot of activity that's led up to this moment. What am I talking about? We'll talk about that next. Looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories? Then you got to try a Built Bar. We just got through the holidays, and I know my goal is to eat a little healthier this year. If you're like me, where you want to eat healthier but don't want to compromise on taste, man, then I've got the thing for you. You got to try a Built Bar. With Built, healthy is actually tasty. Seriously, they're so delicious you won't think they're good for you. Perfect for your New Year's resolution. What makes Built Bar so good? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And I've spoke for a long time that you can get these at built.com, but now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today. Walk to the pharmacy section and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. If you're close to Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box of our hit flavors, brownie batter and churro. You can thank me later. The NHL deadline is today, March 3rd. Join us live on Locked On NHL from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern as the Locked On NHL hosts break down the biggest deals from across the league. Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And you know that because you are watching and or listening to this podcast right now. But welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So trade deadline has come and gone and not a lot of action. I'm going to go over the different things, the movement that has gone up with the Capitals leading up to this moment. The big one, the toughest one for me to swallow, was the Caps moving Dmitry Orlov and Garnet Hathaway to the Bruins. Dmitry Orlov, a guy that has been beloved on this team, and guess what? Subsequently has gone to Boston and is killing it. hey, there's no bad blood here. I wish Dmitry Orlov nothing but the best. Same goes for Garnet Hathaway. Really great hockey players. They deserve it. The Capitals acquire from the Bruins a 2024 first-round pick, a 2024 third-round pick, and a 2025 second-round pick in forward Craig Smith. We know what happened next. They took that first round pick and they flipped it and they picked up Rasmus Sandin. A good move, all things considered. We think that Rasmus Sandin will play a big role on this team. The Caps trade to the Maple Leafs Erik Gustafsson and the Boston's 2023 first rounder. Capitals acquire from the Maple Leafs Rasmus Sandin. With John Carlsson originally being the only blue liner signed past 2023, Washington needed to address its pending free agents on the defense. And although Erik Gustafsson expressed his desire to stay, McClellan made the difficult decision to part ways with the blue liner, who had been a bright spot and a major surprise for DC, and expressed his desire to stay for the deal. His 31 assists and 38 points had led all Capitals defensemen as he provided offense and took on a bigger role with John Carlsson out of the lineup, writes Washington Hockey Now. And, if you were asking me, I would have been all in on Erik Gustafsson coming back to this team, but it ultimately wasn't in the cards for whatever reason. Rasmus Sandin, he's going to be an upgrade, and it sounds like he will be in the lineup in the next game there. So we will ultimately see what we have in the tank in Rasmus Sandin. A younger man, 22, I want to say, going on 23 years old, some good upside there. So it sounds like the Capitals were not able to come to terms with Erik Gustafsson and his agent and, Erik Gustafsson himself. And that's why they moved on from him. And it was an interesting thing, because many people thought, that when they got that first round pick in the Orlov Hathaway deal, that they were going to take that to the draft and use that draft capital to draft a player. As it turns out, that was not the case, and that is how Rasmus Sandin came to this team. The Capitals do now, however, have some pretty, a high amount of draft capital, so they can, make some moves, and draft some players on the draft. So that is what we've been hearing all along, that this team needs to get younger and it needs to get faster. And, your wish is Brian McClellan's command. That is what he's going to do. He is slowly going to integrate and make this team younger. He is going to, draft some young players. There might be some activity this summer. You might see some movement at free agency in July. So there are a lot of moving pieces, and you really need to follow this team and make sure and follow Locked On Capitals, as I will follow this all through the end of the season and through the summer. I'll keep you in the know, because why? We're Locked On Capitals. We're not casual Capitals. We're Locked On Capitals here, and that's what we do here. So if you want to be in the know, make sure and follow us on Twitter and YouTube. That's what we do here. So in any event, we will keep you updated on all the movement. So that is what we know right now. It is going to be an interesting draft. We know that we did lose that first round draft pick, but there are still draft picks that the Capitals have at their disposal that they can use. And it's going to be interesting to see how they use those and what players are drafted. I'm hearing it's a pretty good draft, all things considered. And we know that the Capitals need help on the blue line. Not quite as much as we did before, but we still need some help going forward. And I'll talk about that. There is some help coming from Hershey. I'll talk about that in the last segment. So it is interesting, the movement. I think that, myself included, and a lot of Caps fans out there were hoping for the fireworks, that they were going to move this guy, and this team was just going to be, loaded for bear, and we were just going to make a big push. My biggest thing that I'm happy about right now is that Tom Wilson didn't get moved. And everyone's like, well, why would they have moved Tom Wilson? The Twitter sphere was on fire, saying that Tom Wilson was on the verge of getting traded somewhere. And I understand that it was satire, but every time you hear that, you're like, really? I mean, I guess anything's possible. So you look into it and you realize it's ridiculous. But there was some rumors out there. I'm just going to talk about rumors here for a moment, that Tom Wilson was going to go to the Toronto Maple Leafs. And as I wrote on Twitter, I don't care what player they offered us. I don't care if they offered, Marners and Matthew and Tavares and Nylander and all of them. I don't want any of them. I would still rather have Tom Wilson. That's my assessment on it. So crazy times, a crazy day for the Capitals going. But I'm glad that they ultimately took care of a lot of the things that they needed to get taken care of. The other movement last week, or earlier in the week rather, was Lars Eller. a player that will permanently be etched in Capitals history. As we know, the overtime winner against the Columbus Blue Jackets in the playoff, and also the big goal in the Stanley Cup. So he will ever be etched in Capitals memory, and nothing can take that away from him. So in that process, the Capitals sent Lars Eller to the Colorado Avalanche, which is ostensibly a rental. Where will Lars Eller end up when it's all said and done for Washington? Eller's name has been coming up in discussions and speculation for a while, and on Wednesday, a deal finally happened as the Dane was sent west in exchange for a 2025 second-round pick. The Capitals are retaining 31% of his salary, and we know Eller was another pending UFA, so he was not going to come back to the Capitals. That was just the case. I've heard a lot of people saying, why aren't we bringing back Lars Eller? Well, for one, it was an expiring contract. He is getting older. He doesn't fit the narrative of getting younger. And it just wasn't going to work out. I guess anything is possible in the offseason. I hear people saying, with the Locked On Capitals page, I hear a lot of different things from a lot of different fans. And I hear some fans going, well, maybe we'll get Orlov back in the summer. Probably not going to happen, but I admire your optimism, and I admire how you adore Dmitry Orlov. I think he was a great player too, but to a certain extent, as Caps fans, as sports fans in general, the same thing went with Juan Soto and the Nationals, how everyone was up in arms over that. To a certain extent, you just got to, bid these guys a farewell and wish them nothing but the best, because that's ultimately you can do. Things are going to happen. So the other extension was Nick Jensen inked a 3-year, $12.15 million extension on Tuesday, ensuring top 4 depth beyond the season. His new deal carries an AAV of $4.05 million. So a pretty good deal. Of course, the bad thing about all that is literally the day after he signed the deal, he got injured. So we're hoping that his injury is not that significant and he is able to help this Caps team come back and make a push. Now, listen, I am not saying that it is not going to happen. I believe Matt Wyrick said yesterday that he checked on a website that there is still a 10% chance that the Capitals could make it to the playoffs and win a Stanley Cup. So it's going to be a remote possibility. This team is going to have to go on a heater, as they say, like you've never seen before. I want to be drinking that Capitals Kool-Aid and having my eyes closed off to the world, hear no evil, see no evil. Just don't ultimately know if that's going to be the case, but I am going to be positive that they are going to do their level best to achieve their objective. You got to know there's professional hockey players out there. You got, guys playing with pride, Ovi and Oshie and Backstrom and all those guys out there, Wilson. They're not just going to give up. They're not going to just quit. These guys still want to win hockey games. They play with a lot of pride. They might be able to prove everyone wrong. And I would love nothing more than if they were able to do that. All right, so after the break here, we are going to talk about the movement today. We have some players that were called up from Hershey. We have some players that were in Hershey that got new deals. What does that mean for the big team, the Capitals? We'll talk about that next. No matter how the last game went, anytime you take the field, you've got a shot at greatness. Give your team the best shot at winning by recruiting more MVPs with Indeed. If you're hiring, you need Indeed, because Indeed is the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. And Indeed is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applicants that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. And instead of spending hours on multiple job sites hoping to find candidates with the right skills, you need one powerful hiring partner that can help you do it all. Indeed partners you with every step of the hiring process. Find great talent through time-saving tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. With Instant Match, as soon as you sponsor a post, you get a short list of quality candidates with resumes on Indeed that match your job descriptions, and you can invite them to apply right away. Plus, you only pay for quality applicants that meet your must-have requirements. So guys, if you own a business and you're hiring, don't waste time putting out paper applications and having your HR coordinator dig through that. That's a waste of time. That's why you need Indeed. So go to Indeed and make your life easier. Go to Indeed today. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Sorry, in that last ad read, my computer decided to freeze, so there was that moment of like, okay, here we go. So anyway, in this next segment, we are going to talk about the movement on the Capitals. So we talked about the movement, the new deal to Nicolas Aube Kubel, and the arrow seems to be pointing to the fact that Trevor Van Riemsdyk will be on this team. Again, it is 3:34 Central as I record this. If something changes, I will post an update. But what have we heard here so far is the Capitals also inked Ryan Hofer to an entry-level contract. So they are planning for the future here, and those are good things. It's good to have your eye on the future and seeing what the Capitals are planning on doing next, because sometimes you're left in the dark and you're like, well, what is this team doing? Especially today, you look at the different things that happen and you're like, well, is this team even going to contend? I think that sometimes you just have to be patient. Also on Thursday, Washington signed Hershey Bears winger Ethan Frank to a 1-year, 2-way contract beginning in 23-24. So you know what that means? That does mean some people say it's a 1-year contract, a 2-way contract. That means they have to play on the Capitals. That is not the case. They have the flexibility to play in Hershey, or they have the flexibility to play on the big team. It just has to do with waivers and that kind of thing. So the two-way deal offers the flexibility that he can be sent up and sent down, and that is not an issue going forward. With just over an hour left in the deadline they spoke of here, the Washington Capitals have recalled defensemen Vincent, Iorio, and Gabriel Carlsson from the AHL's Hershey Bears and reassigned Dylan McIlrath. So I like Dylan's game, as I spoke about with Matt Wyrick yesterday. It turns out that, he is, I think they want to say he's 30 years old, I think is what I heard. So not necessarily a young guy, but a good opportunity to see what Vincent, Iorio, and these guys have in the tank. Vincent is one of the names that we heard about in camp. That he is, aiming to be one of the next greatest things going forward. This kind of thing right now is the perfect opportunity for these guys to come to this team and show everyone else what they have in the tank. We saw Vincent do great things in preseason and exhibition games. He's a bit of a younger man, so I didn't really think he was going to be pegged for being on the big team. But now he's going to get his opportunity. How long is that going to be? I don't know. I guess it is going to depend on how he performs. As far as Gabriel Carlsson is concerned, I remember we picked him up in the offseason, kind of a depth piece from the Columbus Blue Jackets. So a good opportunity to see what we have in the tank with some of these younger guys, if it is the perception, and I have heard that it is the perception out there, that this team is not going to make it to the playoffs. What better time to give these guys big league NHL experience than to have them play on the Caps in regular games? Oftentimes in the preseason, you're playing against other AHLers. So in this example, you'll have Vincent and Gabriel. They will have their opportunity to play against other big NHL players and see how they fare. We know that the Hershey Bears are playing well this year, and no doubt that has to do, at least in part, with their performance and how they're playing down there. Let's see if they can, get that magic and they can play that well in the NHL and the big team. That would make Brian McClellan's, questions that he has to answer even a bit more difficult in a way, because then he would have to determine, are these guys ready to play on the big team? Do I need to go out and sign someone? Do I have someone in-house? It's one of the things I talked about on this podcast a lot, is the Capitals' reluctance to utilize the players that are already in their organization down in Hershey, or, down in the ECHL affiliate, the Stingrays in Carolina there. So it's about using all of the players that you have in your disposal first, and then maybe go out and see if you need to make any acquisitions outside of the organization. Because I think that mentality that, I need to sign someone to fill this hole, why don't we see if there is someone within the Capitals organization that can do that instead? It only makes sense to me. You see it done all around the NHL. I just think that you don't see it so much on the Capitals because they have been playing well over the last years. Ever since the Ovi era, the Capitals have been playing pretty well. I mean, I think they've only missed it. The last time they missed the playoffs was 2014. And if they miss it this year, this will be the second time in quite some time. So I think to a certain extent, that is the reluctance for them wanting to get younger. But now, being that they aren't playing as well, this would be the perfect time to see some of these stars down in Hershey shine on the big team and see if they're destined for bigger things. Thank you for making Locked On Capitals your first listen today. Now make your second listen Locked On Game to Game NHL. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game across the NHL with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Locked On NHL, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you find your podcast. So once again, thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals. Make sure and subscribe, follow, share on all the platforms, on Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever. And make sure and go over to YouTube and hit that subscribe button. If you like the videos, give it a thumbs up, leave some comments, share it amongst your friends. Again, if you want to be in the know when it comes to the Capitals, not even just through this season, but all summer, if you want to be in the know with the Capitals, you need Locked On Capitals. So go to YouTube, type in Locked On Capitals, hit the subscribe button, and be in the know. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.